Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of the SAIEE Smart Cities Chapter, and we'll be discussing the current state of smart cities in South Africa. Before we start, a few webinar considerations. Attendees are reminded to ensure the volume is turned up on their device. Ensure you have a stable internet connection. This will ensure the streaming and audio will run smoothly. Attendees can ask questions via the questions panel located within the GoToWebinar control panel. By default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat function is reserved for webinar organizers and panelists to communicate with attendees. Attendees will not be able to chat with each other, however, are encouraged to ask questions. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, SAIEE TV, under the Smart Cities Chapter playlist. This channel is updated regularly, so ensure you check back as often as possible for new uploads. Please click on the link in the chat box to subscribe. It's free. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few days after this webinar. I'd like to introduce you now to our host tonight, as Dr. Rivana Balmahoon. Rivana is an engineer by qualification and has numerous accolades in the engineering space. She's a member of the Institute of Directors of South Africa and is a board member at various startups. She is currently employed as an AI and AR research lead, where innovation is a key aspect. Rivana is also a senior leader, tech specialist and advisor at a global social enterprise, WoomHub. She holds a PhD in engineering and has previously worked in positions to lead innovation, strategic analytics, and as a senior data scientist. She's interested in cybersecurity, smart cities, and artificial intelligence, and a passion for STEM skills development. Over to you, Rivana.
Thank you very much for that, Minx, and good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be moderating this webinar this evening. I think without further ado, let's get started. If you're here, you're keen on hearing more about smart cities, and our first speaker this evening is Dr. Ben Kotze. Dr. Ben Kotze is a professional technician. He's an assistant dean in teaching and learning at the Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment and Information Technology at the Central University of Technology. He has published augmented reality in smart manufacturing, a user experience evaluation, and a hidden Markov model and fuzzy logic forecasting approach for solar geyser, water heating, and 12 more articles. He is well versed in sensors, in MATLAB, image processing, instrumentation, electronics, digital signal processing, C++, LabVIEW programming, and navigation. I think let's give Dr. Ben Kotze the floor to tell us more about his presentation. He's going to be speaking about smart farming and building in the context of smart cities.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome attending. I hope that the organizers can hear me and everybody can hear me. My chat is going to be on smart farming and buildings, but in the larger context of smart cities. So as our rural areas becoming much more part of our cities, this is where we as an province in the Free State, the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape do play quite a big role. Now, as I've said, I'm going to look at smart farming and smart buildings, a little bit of the technology and the research currently going on in our institution and maybe in our province. What must be noted is this is only a small tip of the iceberg, and I could keep you almost a semester busy with all of this. I'm going to start off with the challenges. Currently, I'm presenting in the darkness here from my side. But what is interesting, and in September 1882, the city of Kimberley became the first in the Southern Hemisphere which had streetlights switched on. So this is challenging times, difficult times maybe for all of us, but also innovative times. I'm moving towards what our technicians, technologists, and engineers are posed of. So there's challenges and infrastructure problems, but we always come up with ingenuable ideas and ways to fix things. So bear with me, and I hope you enjoy this short journey. Now, starting with smart farmings, the concept of a smart farm or smart city is all about what is the input, what is being measured, what is being done with that information, with that data, and what is the output that you want to. And this is not something new. It started off with small farming, small irrigation farms, where sensors like humidity sensors, ground sensors, rain sensors, temperature sensors, all that was being used to activate and control something. These days, the internet plays a huge role in the connectivity and for us to have much more control over that. Moving towards more larger areas, dry land and irrigation farming, it's been used in, as this example shows, tractors being plowing or harvesting crop, and the information is captured in that area to see what is happening there. Was their yield better, not better, helping with financial planning, helping with next year crop, used for irrigation, and all of these technologies needed to have a good crop. So these aren't new, but it is technologies being used to have a smart farm. Then a little bit later on came something we call a drone, and it's a playful thing, but it's been used as well. And one of the companies I can talk of is stationed in Stellenbosch and working closely with an American company, where they have drones that takes pictures of crops, and this information is fed into an artificial intelligence system where this data is being used for either irrigation, looking after crops, looking at pesticides, drought-stricken areas, or whatever the case may be. So yes, technology could be playful as well. On the right-hand side, you will see the more on-the-ground type of unit, which could monitor also the same things, but it's much more mobile on the ground. And currently, such technology is used on prickly pear farms within our region. Then also augmented reality and virtual reality got its place, where this could be used in training farmers, training people that's controlling these devices, helping them identifying issues and problems, and even as you go along, give you some information and ideas, identification of plant types of insecticides or whatever the case may be. And then looking at the simple example where you can have almost a whole weather station being on a broomstick, almost assisting with this data capturing and then eventually controlling and giving you some sort of output that would be used to your own benefit. Then more towards projects and research. Now, simple things always have a tendency to solve bigger problems. And as we've got load shedding, coming up with a diesel or petrol pump, pumping the water to a pivot, and also generating power for the motors, a standardized pivot could be used for irrigation and small farming communities where it's needed. Then also something like an automatic feeder. Now, we're all used to these things that hang behind or underneath a tree branch, but taking this further in not just measuring a RFID tag in opening the feeding bin or closing it, a visualized camera system, including maybe infrared, could be used and is currently being researched and used for identifying animals to maybe select that this bunch of food is supposed to go to a sheep or maybe a cow. But for people in our areas that's also having wild buck and wild animals, it could be used for this. And not just for feeding purposes, but also identifying the physical conditions, or maybe if the Eve or the cow is going to be having a smaller one. This is some of the technologies being incorporated in some of these things. Then looking at now my load shedding is giving me problems. Sorry for that. Scales is not something old or new, but identifying these animals going through this for feeding purposes, for instance, for milk cows or people that's utilizing this is also important. So now my battery is going down, but sorry for that. But these could be now further research in, again, utilizing vision in identifying these animals, not to have them in close proximity, which is some of the issues being done. Then for our rural areas, smaller farmers, utilization of self-sustainable controlled hydroponics systems is being developed and used for an income and also providing for the scarcity of food and food security. Well known and well seen is our solar panels coming up on the roofs of towns, city buildings, but also in farmers used for pumping, for servicing or giving power to house outlets. But more increasingly, security is being implemented, and you will see these type of cameras being implemented for security purposes, connected to a centralized control room, identifying number plates, people that's not known in the region, to assist farmers and agri-control and security for these purposes. Going on to smart buildings, yes, it's not just that's going into the building, but also how it's been designed and how it's been started off with. Where's the energy coming from? How's the energy being consumed? How is it being saved? How's the water resources being done? But then looking at what is going into it, security, control of water usage, connectivity, fire alarms. But all of this is not just to save and to make it easier for people, but also to conserve and to have an individualized setting, but could be monitored and controlled. Moving back closer to ourselves, our engineering and technology building is such a building which was developed a few years ago and built, and you can see the windows much larger for natural sunlight to go into, so your electricity bill is much lower, the isolation being implemented. All of this went into the design, and silly enough, it's not something new for us that went to compulsory military services, mirrors that's been made of stainless steel for multiple reasons. All of this, as I've said, needs some monitoring and control and inputs, and for this you need to monitor maybe the water usage, and for this example the electricity usage, to be able to control it properly. Looking at some of the graphs, you could see during the day the usage drops up to 6 p.m. and then there may be some late class, evening classes, but then to monitor unwanted activities maybe within the building that could be transferred into security systems or control systems, and then yet again looking at when air cons has been switched on to maybe make it easier or more livable for us in winter here in Bloemfontein at the -7. So all of that could start making sense and could be controlled and monitored, and even being planned, and as such being used in artificial intelligence to control these devices. For us, it's not just how it's being done, where we're going to, but also how we implement this for our future generations. So all of these type of research and development of projects do find a home in our tertiary education, where students get to learn how to do this, program, use these type of technologies. And to end off with this presentation, I don't know where we're going to end up with smart cities, smart farming, but and if it's going to be something wow, totally different to what we are used to, or if it's going to be utilizing something which phased out maybe in the olden days. But what I do know, that we live in exciting times although very challenging. So thank you for this short few minutes joining me, and I'm open for any questions or suggestions or implementations. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Katsa. I think it's very enlightening to see where we're at and just to get a large scope of smart cities from that perspective. I'd like to encourage the audience to please post questions as we go about this. So let's whatever questions you'd like to ask, please go ahead and post it now. But just to kick us off in terms of questions, Ben, at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that there are many challenges that face us in terms of smart cities, and you spoke about the fact that there are infrastructure problems, but that we do come up with quite ingenuable ways of fixing things. What do you think is the biggest infrastructure problem that plagues smart cities?
It all depends what the outcome would be. If you, for instance, want to have a remote control, centralized communication hub for several buildings, for instance, and you are the owner, obviously connectivity in terms of Wi-Fi, fiber, or even cell phone providers would be playing a huge role in this. And if something like load shedding, theft, something like that comes into play, it poses a huge problem because of some of the distances, if it's not next to one another, or if it's not well planned ahead, like ring feed, circle feed systems. Also, how you want to save money, for instance. You could save money on the control and implementation of a building like ours, which is using 180,000 Rand of power during a month, but paying a person, and that was proven, going through the rooms, just switching off all the air cons and the lights not being used, you can pay a person a salary of up to 40,000 Rand in the savings, and you have a break-even point. So it all depends what would be the outcome, what would be what you want to achieve. And unfortunately, as I'm an engineer, we usually build things which everybody else thinks is silly, and we think of ideas or ways how to implement this to have fun with it. So that's my view. It sounds silly, but it all depends where you want to go to and what you want to achieve. If you go back to agriculture, there's a problem there that it's supposed that we have to employ a lot of people. But as soon as your employer becomes a problem, you move to something else. Now, in Europe, it's a different issue where they have got the technology because they don't have the workforce. Whereas in South Africa, we've got the workforce. We just need to train them and to trust them. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's a very important topic as well. Just when we speak through this, I've got a question that's come through from the audience. So this says, well, firstly, thank you for an interesting presentation. Do you think that South Africa is actually keeping up with smart cities technologies when you compare us with international implementation of these technologies?
I'm just going to show my face and prove that I'm a little bit in darkness. Yes, I definitely think South Africa in a lot of terms are way ahead. I could give you examples of a student of ours that was working in Germany, and he's currently being employed as the head of technical services because they had load shedding. Or not load shedding, the power went off, and as our student was so used to load shedding, he could sort it out very quickly and implement some solutions. So South Africa in a lot of ways is way ahead of the rest of the world. It all depends on what you foresee to be the implementation of, and I'm coming back to my introduction, street lights in 1822 was smart cities. So what we perceive as a definition of smart cities. So yes, in a lot of ways, we're way ahead. In a lot of ways, we are maybe behind, but I think it's more on the implementation side or rather on the technology side. So that would be my quick answer.
Dr. Kotze, there's another question from Jonathan Hensley. He says, thank you, Doc, for the presentation, and it is appreciated the innovation that exists at our various institutions. My question is, are we as a country ready to move into having smart cities given the various challenges that exist within our cities and municipalities?
Yes, definitely, definitely. There's a lot of solutions that could immediately alleviate the issues of, let's call it, and I'm going to call it boldly, the theft of money, the transfer of money with regards to different. If you buy capital and you've got implementation and services that could be automated and artificial intelligence sorted, a lot of problems could be solved. So yes, we've got that technology, we can implement it, but we also have another obligation as engineers to look after our fellow man and how to provide for him or herself. So yes, that's, I think, the biggest issue. It's an ethical issue, where to draw the line. But technology is there, smart cities is there. We as an institute are already collaborating with other institutions in Saudi Arabia. We've got currently our 4IR summit today and tomorrow within Bloemfontein, where people from Singapore are also visiting. And if you want to look at smart cities, you can use them as a benchmark. And for them to come to us and to look at some of the technologies and be keynote speakers within Bloemfontein shows how we are role players in the world, definitely.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that response. The next question is from Angela Petzer. Dr. Kotze, are the technologies for smart buildings implemented in our government-funded human settlements program? Basically, how will we convince government to support these programs?
That's a difficult question to ask. I must ask the politicians rather. But from my point of view, you can start large by providing them ways why it's beneficial, or you can start small by providing them something like solar panels when they have got load shedding, control of water usage when they have to pay for it. It's very difficult. In a lot of ways, if I can use our teaching and learning LMS system, in other words, it's like Blackboard or Zoom or Moodle, all of these technologies we knew of in the past. We maybe have used it, but we never embraced it. When we came into COVID and needed to communicate like we are doing now, all of a sudden that came to the forefront and became a necessity. So I really can't answer that. It could be a boom next week, it could be a boom in 10 years' time. But for us as engineers, we want this. We want to stay abreast of this, and we want to have our youngsters taught with these type of technologies. Yet again, there could be an epidemic coming out which would prevent us from using electricity, prevent us from clean water. I don't have those answers, but the definition of smart cities is within our own eyes, as I see it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Kotze. And thank you very much for your presentation. I think we are in a position now to move on to our next presentation. But with that, I'd like to thank the audience so far for your questions and for the presentation. So our next speaker is Tinus Kruger. Now, Tinus is a registered architect has been involved with research and implementation projects that are related to architecture and settlement making, which focuses on poor communities and vulnerable groups. And that has been since he started his career at CSIR in 1990. His research interest is primarily housing, human settlements, and community safety. He has led the Sustainable Human Settlements team since 1999. The team implements diverse research projects related to settlement making, processes, and integrated planning and design for sustainable, ecologically sensitive, and resource-efficient settlements. These include projects dealing with people-driven housing, municipal infrastructure, appropriate technologies, and crime prevention through environmental design. Tinas is going to take us through his presentation now, so I'd like to hand over to you, Tinas.
There we go. You should be able to see and hear me now. At least see the presentation. Is that correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'll also switch my camera on for a second so that you can also see that since I realized I said I started in 1990, I'm not 100 years old yet. I started when I was 12 years old at the CSR. But thank you very much, first of all, and I'm going to switch off the camera now so that you can concentrate on the real thing. Thank you very much for the invitation to the Institute. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate the fact that you took a bit of a gamble to ask someone to present that you have not seen before and that you do not know, especially since I'm from a group that really works in the field of architecture and urban design planning, town and regional planning. And I'm going to speak to many engineers, and I hope that my presentation is not too simple or non-technical for you so that you can understand the simple language that I have to use so that I can understand it. Right, I'm going to talk today about, oh yes, and I also just want to mention, thank you very much to Ben for the presentation that involved the technologies and the photographs of technologies, because I'm not necessarily going to do it. I'm also not in an exotic location in the Free State. I'm in Tshwane, but I do at least have solar, so hopefully I will not have problems with connectivity today. So the topic of this presentation is a South African framework for creating, and then you'll see it's in cursive, inclusive smart cities. And it links to one of the questions that were asked just now. I'm going to structure this presentation according to these focus areas. I'll provide you with a little bit of background about the work, that the research into smart cities that we did at the CSIR and that we're busy with. I also want to talk a little bit about the interpretations of a smart city and our take on that. Then, of course, we want to move into smart cities within our own context in South Africa, something that has also been mentioned in the questions. And then I will focus on the framework that we were developed for smart cities in South Africa with the government department. But the information that is provided in this talk today it's also covered in that document called the South African Smart Cities Framework. So all of it really brings together the research that we've conducted over the past number of years. So just to provide some context to the talk that I'm going to give, we talk about the CSIR research. Why did we start? And we started a few years ago, and of course, this is common knowledge. There was a number of references to smart cities in the State of the Nation address, which started way a few years ago already, and references to Lanseria and that. So there was a flurry in government suddenly about, my goodness, now we need to do something, and a lot of perhaps misunderstanding about what needs to be done in South Africa. So there is an international and local, and I use the word fascination with this phenomenon, because sometimes people know exactly what it can do and can't, and sometimes it's really just based on hearsay almost. So there are misunderstandings, expectations of what it can and cannot achieve, there are misinterpretations, when we look at the international examples versus what we can do in the South African context. So we realized as the CSIR that as a science council, we are ideally positioned to provide some unbiased, impartial and factual information based on research. So we conducted the research and then also tried to define an appropriate interpretation for us, what is a smart cities. And then of course, we see this with many municipalities and increasing pressure to become smarter, whether it's feasible, whether it's practical or not. We know of small towns that are being told by politicians, you must become smart, but they don't even have computers or electricity. So then they struggle. How do we become smart? Just to come back into the research group that I'm leading, our research group, like I mentioned, focus on planning, design, and management of human settlements. So I'm not going to talk about technology in this presentation. What we see as our role with this particular bit of research, not to say that other people in the CSR do not conduct research into technologies, of course we do. But what we are trying to do is to support local government and of course other role players, including engineers, with making informed decisions related to the way that we identify, plan and implement smart cities in a way that will be inclusive, and to identify smart initiatives that are appropriate to the South African context. This talk will deal with those aspects as well, because that's the focus of our specific group's research. So there are many interpretations of a smart city, but we do know that there's really not a universally accepted definition of a smart city. There are many, but you can't say this is the internationally accepted definition. There's also a growing realization that smart technologies, whatever that means, should not be prioritized and implemented at the expense of something like social inclusion or sustainability. So therefore, most of the recent definitions of smart cities focus on this idea of improving people's quality of life. And you can go and have a look at some of these lovely worded definitions. For instance, United Nations Specialized Agency for ICT will have a specific definition. The ISO group, the Smart City Strategic Advisory Group, will have another definition. And we see, like in many of the definitions or descriptions of human settlements, the words social inclusion, sustainability, improving people's quality of life is in there. The question that we ask in our research is, do people really understand what it means, or is it just a term that is in there because it is the sexy term of the moment? And the reason for saying this is we've all seen these popular images of smart cities, and they all these high-tech visions of something that really are placeless. So whether people in the middle of nowhere or in America or Europe talk about smart cities, they use the same images. It can be anywhere, and they're always clean, they're orderly, and most often have flying cars and things, but they do not seem to relate to any specific context and acknowledge what we would call actual urban conditions. And this is something that also led us down our path of research, is this idea, yes, we must be aspirational, but there's a point where I think we also need to say, let's not promise this. So of course, from a research point of view, we thought we must first try and identify the term, or define the term smart city for ourselves, and the two aspects of it, smart and city. And we know that smart is generally associated with a range of these technological and digital concepts and interventions, and specifically ICT, and it includes data and the use of data. Often we'll also find that there's a particular focus when people talk about smart on technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, and whatever that means for people as well. But we believe that in addition to this technology intensive interpretation, We also have to acknowledge that there are other interpretations like intelligent or knowledge intensive that should not be forgotten. And even more critical for us, the term technology could be expanded and is in many cases is expanded to include innovative approaches or techniques or processes, as well as what we would just call non-conventional interventions and scientific innovation. So not necessarily always ICT. City is another component of this smart city phenomena that people often misunderstand because they immediately associate city with what is geographically a city, the metros, the large areas. It's in the discourse about smart cities, that's not the case. City has multiple meanings in this smart city conversation, and you'll find that often if you go and read up on it. It's actually a catch-all phrase that includes all various types of settlements or parts of settlements. So it could refer to anything. It could refer to, yes, a city or a town or a village of any size, and also a question that we often get, including in a rural location. No problem with that. So it's often also really, it talks about municipalities, but it could also be a new greenfield custom-built development that's either linked to a city or not. It could be a precinct development such as a business park. Sometimes people upgrade or retrofit certain aspects like transportation or connectivity in a city, and that's their smart city initiative. Or it could be an existing town or part of a town that is upgraded. And then, of course, we do get the new residential, commercial, or mixed-use developments with that people now love to market as smart. So it's a privately developed gated community. So you can see that it doesn't really matter how you define it. It's about what you want to achieve. And linked to this is what we call promises, opportunities, concerns, and limitations, because that's, I think, where a lot of the discomfort comes in with people about some of the things that are promoted. And there's also why people do not understand how smart can actually help achieve certain objectives. So the promises and opportunities, yes, it's more effective. You can have data-driven decision-making. You can reduce your environmental footprint. It will create new economic development opportunities, improve the quality of life. It could improve the safety of the communities. It could also enhance the communication and the engagement between residents and the municipality and within the municipality, and it could lead to cost savings. Now, all of these, we say, yes, they're opportunities, but we also have to be careful when people make promises about this and make sure that we really know that whatever initiative we're embarking on can actually do this. Some of the concerns and limitations, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is that the interventions, the smart city interventions or projects may not be appropriate to the context, and the context could be the South African context, but it could also be a very, very specific context within a city, because obviously cities don't look the same all over the city. Something that is really, I think, something that we need to be very careful of is the vested corporate interests. We find that some corporations or organizations will go to municipalities and sell to them a technology that may not really address the priority needs of the municipality. So there's only one interest there, and there's the interest of that corporate entity. We also find that technology is sometimes used as the starting point and not the enabler. So you have a technology push. So you've got a technology and you try and find a problem to solve, or convince someone that they can solve a problem with this technology because you have it available. There are many ethical concerns as well that we need to be aware of, specifically when it comes to data and to hacking and those sort of things. So there are some concerns there. And then we have a number of unintended consequences that people do not always understand, like social exclusion or widening the digital divide. And these are just some of the things that I think we're all aware of, but that sometimes get forgotten. So what do we propose for a smart city in the South African context? And I just want to perhaps stop here and just mention there's no such thing as the ultimate or the perfect smart city. We prefer to talk about smart city initiatives because smart cities grow over time. You don't build a smart city and now it's finished. And specifically when we talk about municipalities, they have smart city initiatives or smart initiatives. So what do we mean by that in the South African context? Well, first of all, we need, again, being researchers, ask the question, what do South African cities really look like? If you look at these photographs, we've got the high income area on the right top. You've got other types of, how do we define really what a South African city is like? And that brings us to the point. We must be very careful not to sell smart city as a package deal, given this reality. And very careful also, we need to understand the realities of our landscape, of our, specifically the urban landscape, because they can have either opportunities for smart technologies and smart initiatives, or they could be the reason why certain interventions do not work and fail. We know we've got inequality, extreme inequality. We've got very high levels of poverty, unemployment, and it leads to informality in many ways, housing, business, and we need to acknowledge that so that we can make the right decisions when we look at smart city interventions. We also, and I don't even have to mention anything about Eskom or electricity at the moment. We're all acutely aware of it, but there are other service delivery challenges, many of them, and they could provide, again, the opportunity for smartness, but in some cases they could actually avoid it could actually be a stumbling block to innovation. We have capacity constraints, we have the unequal distribution of facilities and services, as well as what we all know, the aging infrastructure and the lack of maintenance that we experience in many of our cities and towns. And of course, we do have the crime, violence, and lawlessness that we also have to consider when we look at smart initiatives and appropriate smart initiatives. So we believe that the smart city appropriate to the local context must be based on the principle of inclusivity, so that the initiatives that we implement, specifically I'm talking about municipal driven initiatives, not necessarily always private initiatives, should not have an adverse effect on certain communities or members of society, and it should not further marginalize the poor and other vulnerable groups, not only the poor. And this is perhaps a bit of a naughty slide. This is the proposed, the images that we see of the Lanseria smart city on the left. Just a few kilometers away is what you see on the right, is Diepsloot. So the question that we have to ask is, how inclusive will this be, and what benefit will it have for the people, or will it further marginalize the people of Diepsloot? Just a question, and I'll leave it there. So based on all of this, we have now developed a framework for South African smart cities. And this framework was developed for and in collaboration with the Department of Cooperative Governance, DCOG, and the ministry that we all know as COGTA. It supports the department in the department's efforts to guide and coordinate smart city initiatives planned and implemented throughout the country. That's one of the main aims of this framework. But importantly, it guides decision-making and provides municipalities, and again, other role players, with some form of a structured approach to assist them when they have to identify and plan and implement smart city initiatives that are appropriate to the local context. It provides a conceptual structure, it's a framework. So it highlights the potential contribution and perceived limitation of smart city interventions. Some of the things that we've mentioned before are dealt with in more detail. And then the next two bullets, I will briefly go into that. It talks about a set of principles to assist in establishing a common understanding of what we believe the characteristics of smart cities in South Africa should be, and then what would be the preconditions on the one hand, and then the enablers when you want to start with a smart city intervention. What this framework is not, it's not an instruction manual. It does not provide specifications or norms and standards of technologies. It doesn't even provide examples of technologies. It is at a slightly higher level about the qualities that we think that you should aim for when you implement smart city initiatives. I just want to check with the organizers. I've got a little bit to go still. Do you want me to move faster, or can I continue with this? Because we do not have one of the speakers. Sorry, say that again.
I said, please continue. It's okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. I just don't want to waste anyone's time. Good. So I mentioned that there will be, we've included in this framework guiding principles to create inclusive, again, smart cities. So we've identified these 6 interdependent principles, and you'll see they overlap. So again, these principles should assist with decision making. And the first of these principles is that a smart city, or an inclusive smart city, is smart for all. It is not something that benefit only certain communities or certain aspects or certain parts of the city. It should eventually improve the well-being of the entire city. And again, we talk about something that's now driven mainly by the municipality for the whole of the municipal area. Some of these initiatives should be accessible even to those that may not be digitally literate. And I don't think we always understand, because we always see people with smartphones, but you do not see the people in old age homes who cannot access anything because they just are not digitally literate. We're not all tech savvy people. We are not all tech savvy. I mentioned that. A critical next principle is that we should use technology as an enabler and not a driver. It goes back to the technology push issue. So what we're saying, it should be used as a means to an end, a tool or a mechanism or something that will enable and improve certain functions and operations, if you have also the people that can use that and support it and maintain it. So the selection and implementation of technologies, the way you do that is critical. It should be informed by the real needs, not the needs that you've been told you have, and the requirements, rather than the assumption that technology in itself will solve a particular problem. We know that it doesn't happen. We've seen where people think that by having an app that will tell the municipality where the potholes are, the potholes will magically fill themselves. It doesn't happen like that. If you do not have water reticulation to a specific part of your city, it's no use putting water sensors in the pipes to tell you that there's no water. If you do not have the people to go and fix it, it still does not help. So a city is not smart because it uses technology. A city is smart because it uses technology to make its citizens' lives better. That's from the Smart Cities Council. The next one, an inclusive smart city is shaped by and responds to the local context. And again, we talk about local here. It's not only South African, it's the particular context within the city even that are so different to each other. So the local conditions need to drive the decisions that you make. We must understand that there are certain characteristics that would also direct the type of intervention, like informality, or in many cases, the municipal capacity or lack thereof, that should drive how you make decisions. And this predetermined concept that people see, and we see municipalities going overseas to other countries and other cities and come back with wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, this is what they want. That's not what should drive your decision to implement a smart city initiative. Again, it is informed by the real needs of communities, which links to the others. And that's why you need to involve communities and in the decision making, but from the start, not after you've made the decision. You tell them, this is what you want. Do you want this app or that app? It's something that's much more than that, which we call co-production from the start. And again, community in this case involves all stakeholders. It's not just the community that we see, the people living in a specific area. There's the residents, it's a business community. whether it's formal or informal, all of them have a role to play and may have needs that you can address with smart technologies or smart interventions. So it's all of those. I think this is almost the last one, the fifth. You must embrace appropriate partnerships and innovation. Don't be shy to form partnerships, but be aware of the aims and objectives of some of the companies that you will be working with. So you need reliable partners that share your values and objectives and will make sure that what you eventually, the intervention that you implement actually will achieve what you want to achieve and not what that company would like to achieve, which is a bit more profit and contracts for maintenance until the end of time. You can incorporate a collection of several projects, whether it's done by the private sector or citizens, whatever. So a whole host of projects could become your portfolio of smart city initiatives. And again, make sure that it is shaped by and it responds to your local context. And then lastly, if a city is not sustainable, resilient, and safe, you cannot call it a smart city. So you must link it to other objectives and visions of other documents and other policies in the country. For instance, even the Sustainable Development Goals or the Integrated Urban Development Framework, the IDP of the city, all those should be part of your decision-making process when you try to identify a smart city initiative. Smart city initiatives, we do know the technologies will have the potential to enhance sustainability and the correct characteristics of a sustainable city and increase resource efficiency, like we've seen in the previous talk. Most certainly, it's just the way that you use it and where you use it, and if you understand what will happen afterwards once you've implemented them. It could contribute to making cities more resilient, handle shocks and stresses, and of course, we've seen it also in the previous presentation. It could play a key role in creating safer communities. But again, if you do not have an understanding of what it entails, if you do not have the people to respond to an app that tells you that something is happening, you do not have a smart technology. It's just an app or whatever it is. A camera, if you do not have people responding or doing something with it, think carefully how you implement it. And then I think this is almost the end. Then there's just all these principles that I've now mentioned, the 6 principles. How do you implement them? And there's a two-stage process that is involved in the framework. The one is, well, the intention is that you assess your smart readiness of the municipality, for instance. How do you understand your strengths and your weaknesses so that you make the right decisions regarding an intervention that you are planning or that you're thinking of even? So it will also help you to make trade-offs between different needs and funding requirements. So it helps you to prioritize where you will get the most bang for your buck. So there's two aspects to it. The first, you must understand your preconditions. The first thing is the municipality able to provide services under current conditions? Do you have the basics in place? Do you provide water, sanitation, electricity? If none of this is really happening, like we've seen in some of the towns, then you must ask the question, wouldn't it be smart just to start by doing what we're supposed to be doing? So why do we want to call yourself smart? And that's also a problem that we have, is that you get ranking as the second smartest city in the country, or the first or the smartest, for the sake of being on that ranking. So improving the delivery of basic services should be your first priority, rather than planning a smart city initiative that may not satisfy most people's pressing needs. I think that is the key underlying aspect of what we want to promote in this framework. Then the enablers, so you've done your assessment of, and you say, yes, there's certain areas where we could improve. There's certain areas where we first need to get the basics right. So this is where you assess where could you improve your services and how could smart technologies or smart initiatives help. So we're definitely not saying don't do it, first get the basics right. There are definitely areas where a smart technology or or intervention could actually improve the effectiveness and efficiency of services delivered, just as there would be areas where it make no sense to invest a lot of money in a smart technology. So to conclude, really, what are we saying? In order for you to develop smart interventions, you must make smart decisions. And to make smart decisions, you must ask the right questions. Is our municipality smart ready? Do we have the basics in place? And how would that affect the type of intervention that we plan and that we design and that we implement? Do we want to make our city smarter for the right reasons? Is it really to improve quality of life and do all those nice things? Or is it to satisfy a demand from somewhere that we must become smart and we really can't even operate that? Also, what is our interpretation of a smart city? Sometimes you do not need to go to the high tech to say this, we are actually being smart by doing certain things. And then, of course, then you look at how do we exploit technology to the benefit of all people and communities in the city, and how do we improve the well-being of the entire city with our smart initiatives that we've now identified by looking at all these factors. And that is it from me. You are welcome. You can download this framework from, and I'm not sure if these will be available. I'm sure you're not going to remember the address there at the bottom. You can just search for Smart Cities Framework and use the word UKESA, which is the Urban Knowledge Exchange Southern Africa, that is also being run by our group at the CSIR. Elsewhere, I'm not sure I can put this in the chat or somewhere for someone to see. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tinus, for your presentation and enhancing our understanding about smart cities from a South African context. Definitely valuable. Let's get into some of the questions that have come up. The first one is from Angela Petzer. Tinus, up to now, the South African municipalities have been embarking on smart cities, and these have primarily been the metros. You said that the smart cities should be applicable to all types of settlements. How would you advise small town municipalities to approach smart cities if they are interested?
Thanks very much for that question. I think what Engela is talking about is actually quite a realistic scenario where smaller towns would like to embark on a smart city initiative or a number of smart city initiatives, but they do not know where to start. And I think from our side is the first thing that they need to do is to do an assessment of, like I mentioned, of what is the current situation, what is the status quo. We at the CSIR, together with other partners, have developed a very pragmatic, brief guide on how to start, where to start, what actions to take, what steps to take. It will be available fairly soon, which will help smaller towns to at least identify where do they start. And I think the key here again is don't start with a technology and work your way back. Like many of these towns get inundated with information about all sorts of technologies. First understand and look at it really from your perspective. What do we need and where do we need to invest money? That would be my very first suggestion, is get to understand your municipal area and your needs and your community's needs first. I'm not sure if that answers Engela.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that response, Tinus. Then there's another question from Ramaswamy Godfrey Matsi, but paraphrasing it a little bit, is there a city within South Africa that you think can be considered a smart city or heading towards there, just based on the definition that you have presented?
Yeah, thanks for that. Like I mentioned, let me just make that clear again. I don't think there's something as a complete smart city. So many cities in South Africa tell us that they're smart, and you will find that. So cities like Cape Town, Tshwane, Durban, eThekwini would promote a number of aspects to say that they're smart. I think in many instances they have smart aspects to the city. In some cases, cities say they're smart just because you can log your meter reading on an app. Maybe that is smart. Maybe it's just a normal thing for today. I don't know. But yes, there are many of the metros would say that they're a smart city. But again, from our perspective, they have most certainly smart initiatives within the city. Does that? I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much for that response, Tinus. I think it does. The next question is from Cicelo Mabuza, but just asking it from a more relevant perspective to your presentation. So firstly, thank you for your presentation. And then the question revolves around, as a Johannesburg resident, where we have a deteriorating and unsafe city centre, what will it take to make the Johannesburg city centre a smart city of the future? So I think it's specifically speaking to the fact that it's unsafe and your relevance to, or the fact that you had mentioned inclusivity. But what do you think it would take the Johannesburg city centre to become smart?
Yeah, thanks for a relevant question, difficult one to answer, of course, because if you talk about it and you've mentioned the safety and the crime issue, so I guess again, like you said, Ivana, that's perhaps the perspective that this question is coming from. That involves a lot more than just say something like a smart app where you can record or a crime, or you can send it to some other room where people will respond. To me, it is needs a much more integrated approach, and that means that you need to look at urban upgrading initiatives. You need to look at something that I've been doing working for the past 20 years, which is called crime prevention through environmental design, where the design and the upgrading of the existing city center itself could also play a role. You need some social interventions, but then of course, obviously, something like policing, which we know, given what is in the news lately, is a problem. So you can have smart technologies and you can have the cameras, and there's a lot of cameras there. But if you do not have the people that can respond to it, then your investment in the technology, which will be millions, will not really help you. So it is really making everything work that will help to make the inner city there a smart area. If everything is working together, not just one aspect of it. I don't want to go into much more detail because it could become quite an intricate discussion.
No problem, Tinus. Thank you so much for that. Then our last question for you is from Cindy Mochabi. The idea here is around the fact that, and the sentiment shared is that the practicality of smart cities. How practical do you think the Smart City Initiative implementation would be when municipalities are struggling with funding and basic services? And of course, you know, issues like prioritization comes in here. But do you have a different perspective on this, on the practicality of smart cities?
That's a question goes to the core really of what we try to do with the framework and with our research. Well, first of all, cities and towns, they're all different, and they're all at different stages of either their capabilities and capacity or different stages of decay in some cases. So the number one thing is we don't have a blanket answer for all the cities and towns in South Africa. That's where we talk about the context. So in some cases, some cities and towns may have the ability to actually exploit smart technologies and smart initiatives to improve what they're doing, because they may have the people with the skills, they may have the technologies available, they may have the ability to make it work. But again, critically, so in practice that it could work in certain areas, but for certain aspects, again, you don't have to do everything at once. Water or transportation or sanitation, whatever, pick one and make that work. And then you will have a better chance of succeeding. I don't think that in some cities or towns that any technology will be of any assistance. I think it could in many cases be a waste of money. This is my personal view, because I think if you can't deliver very basic services because of a lack of qualified people and committed people, then you may have a technology that can help you up to a point, but then again, eventually someone has to go and fix it. And so the answer is, depending on the city, in some cases it will be practical, in some cases I would not advise at all that you even go down this route. First, just do what you're supposed to do in horrible basic terms.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for those responses, Tinus, and for your presentation as well. I think it was quite enlightening for us all. So I think with that, I'd just like to mention that our third speaker was actually unable to make it at short notice. So what you've heard this evening is two great presentations. One was the overview of smart cities, gave us a very nice overarching view of the smart city concept and what it is about, and some good examples. And the second presentation, an in-depth view about smart cities from a South African perspective, which also touches a lot of pertinent issues. So I trust that both these presentations have actually increased your knowledge in the smart city space, and your appetite to actually engage on smart cities, on the topic of moving forward with smart cities has been increased. So with that, I'd actually just like to thank both our presenters, Dr. Kotze and Tinus Kruger, for your presentations. It really was great to hear you both speak today. And I also want to thank our attendees, so everyone that has attended. Thank you for attending the launch of the Smart Cities chapter at the SAIEE, and we look forward to future engagements with you all. So everyone, thank you very, very much. Minx has posted a message in the chat as well. If you are interested in joining the Smart Cities chapter, please email your bio to smartcitieschapter@saiee.org.za. So with that, I'd like to close the call. Thank you all very, very much, and I hope that you all have a great evening further.